The sky is red. Not sunrise red, not sunset red. Fire red. A woman runs through smoke so thick she can't see her own hands. Her lungs burn with every breath. Behind her, the screaming has stopped in some places. In others, it's just beginning. She clutches a bundle to her chest. It's moving. It's alive. The heat is so intense her eyebrows are singeing. The air itself is on fire. She can feel her skin beginning to blister just from breathing. She turns a corner and stops dead. The canal ahead is boiling, actually boiling. Bodies float in the water, cooked alive when they jumped in to escape the flames. This is Tokyo, March 10th, 1945. And what you're watching is the single deadliest night in human history. More people died in the next 6 hours than in Hiroshima, than in Nagasaki, than almost any bombing in World War II. And here's what they never told you about it. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't collateral damage. This was the plan. 334 American bombers took off that night. Their mission? Operation Meeting House. Their target? Civilian neighborhoods in downtown Tokyo. Their weapon? Something so horrifying that even the pilots questioned their orders. They were carrying incendiary bombs, firebombs, bombs designed specifically to create the largest firestorm ever seen. The goal wasn't to hit factories. It wasn't to destroy military bases. The goal was to burn an entire city to the ground, with everyone in it. By sunrise, 16 square miles of Tokyo would be ash. Over 100,000 people would be dead. 1 million would be homeless. And the man who planned it would later say, "I suppose if I had lost the war, I would have been tried as a war criminal." His name was Curtis LeMay. And this is the story they don't teach in schools. Let's rewind. It's early 1945. World War II has been raging for 6 years. In Europe, the Allies are winning. Germany is collapsing. Hitler's empire is crumbling. But in the Pacific, it's a different story. Japan refuses to surrender. Their soldiers fight to the death. Their kamikaze pilots crash planes into American ships on purpose. Their civilians are trained to resist invasion with sharpened bamboo sticks. American generals are terrified. They're planning an invasion of Japan itself. And military experts predict it will cost 1 million American lives. 1 million. So they're looking for another way, a way to break Japan's will to fight, a way to force surrender without landing troops. Enter Curtis LeMay. He's 38 years old, cold, calculating, ruthless. He doesn't care about honor or rules of war. He cares about results. And he has a theory. Japanese cities are made of wood and paper, densely packed, perfect fuel for fire. If he can create a big enough firestorm, he can destroy Japan's ability to make war. Because in Japan, weapons aren't made in big factories. They're made in small workshops, in people's homes, in neighborhoods. At least, that's what he tells himself. But here's the truth the military didn't want you to know. LeMay knew exactly what he was doing. He was targeting civilians on purpose. Why? Because he believed terror would end the war faster. What happens next will make you question everything you thought you knew about World War II. Because this wasn't just one bombing raid. This was the beginning of a campaign that would burn 67 Japanese cities to ash over the next 5 months. But Tokyo? Tokyo was the test run. The night they proved that fire could be a weapon of mass destruction. Here's how they did it. March 9th, 1945, late afternoon. 334 B-29 Superfortress bombers sit on runways across the Mariana Islands. The crews are getting their briefing, and what they're hearing is making some of them sick. Tonight, they're flying low, only 5,000 to 7,000 feet. Normally, they fly at 30,000 feet. Why the change? Because they're not dropping regular bombs. They're dropping incendiaries, firebombs. Bombs designed specifically to create the largest firestorm ever seen. They're also removing most of their defensive guns and ammunition. Why? To make room for more bombs, more fire. Some pilots ask, are we really attacking civilians? The answer is clear, even if no one says it out loud. Yes. The bombs being loaded are M69 incendiaries. Each one is small, only 6 pounds, but each one contains a gel that sticks to whatever it touches and burns at 2,000 degrees. It's called napalm. Each bomber carries 500 of these bombs. That's 167,000 firebombs total, all aimed at the most densely populated residential area on Earth. The mission is scheduled at midnight, when people are asleep, when they can't escape. As the sun sets, the crews climb into their planes. Many of them are teenagers, kids really, 18, 19 years old. They've been told this will shorten the war, save American lives. But as they take off into the darkness, some of them are praying they're doing the right thing. The bombers fly in waves. The first wave arrives over Tokyo just after midnight. March 10th has begun. Below them, the city is dark, blackout conditions. People are asleep in their wooden homes. The lead bombers drop their payload first. These bombs are different. They're called pathfinders. They create an X of fire on the ground, a target. Within minutes, the main force arrives, and then it begins. The bomb bay doors open. Thousands of small cylinders tumble out into the night sky. For a moment, there's just the sound of wind. Then the cylinders break apart. Each one releases 47 smaller bomblets. These rain down on the neighborhoods below like deadly hail. When they hit rooftops, sidewalks, streets, they explode into sticky, burning gel. Napalm. It splashes on wood, it seeps through roofs, it sticks to skin, and it burns. Within 30 minutes, something terrifying happens. The individual fires begin to merge. They create something called a firestorm. It's a phenomenon so rare and so deadly that most people don't even know it's possible. Here's what happens. The fires get so hot and so large that they create their own weather system. Hot air rises so fast it creates hurricane-force winds. These winds suck oxygen toward the fire from all directions. Wind speeds reach 70 miles per hour, all blowing toward the flames. This creates a feedback loop. More oxygen make the fire hotter. The hotter fire creates stronger winds. The stronger winds bring more oxygen. The temperature at the ground level reaches 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. That's hot enough to melt glass, hot enough to boil water instantly, hot enough to ignite people's clothing while they run. And the people of Tokyo wake up to hell on earth. Imagine this. You're asleep in your wooden home. Your family is around you. Suddenly, you wake to heat, intense heat. You look up and see your ceiling is on fire. You grab your children and run outside. But outside is worse. The street is a river of flame. The wind is so strong you can barely stand. Burning embers fly through the air like horizontal rain. Your neighbors are running in every direction. Some of them are on fire, some are carrying children, some have already stopped moving. You run toward the canal. Everyone says water is the only escape. But when you get there, you see the truth. Thousands of people had the same idea. They jumped into the water. But the fire is so hot that the water is boiling. The people who jumped in were cooked alive. Their bodies float on the surface. You turn to run another direction. But everywhere you look, it's the same. fire, smoke, death. The smoke is so thick that people suffocate before they even reach the flames. They die standing up, lungs full of ash. Mothers clutch dead babies. Families hold hands as they burn together. The lucky ones die from smoke inhalation in their sleep. The unlucky ones run until their bodies simply give out. And above all this, the bombers keep coming, wave after wave after wave. For 6 hours, they drop their payload. By the time the last bomber leaves, they've dropped 1,665 tons of fire. The flames are so bright they can be seen 150 miles away. The pilots flying back to base report they can smell burning flesh inside their planes at 5,000 feet. Let that sink in. They could smell it in the sky. When the sun rises on March 10th, Tokyo is unrecognizable. 16 square miles of the city have been completely erased. All that's left is ash and twisted metal. Bodies are everywhere, thousands of them, burned so completely that you can't tell who they were. Men, women, children, all turned to charcoal. In some places, the fire was so hot that people were vaporized, nothing left but shadows burned into the ground. Survivors wander through the ruins in shock. They're looking for family members, but there's nothing to find. The canals are clogged with bodies, thousands drowned or boiled trying to escape. One survivor later said, "The dead were piled like sandbags. You couldn't walk without stepping on corpses." The official death toll is estimated at 100,000 people. But here's the thing, that's just an estimate. Many bodies were never found. Many were burned so completely there was nothing to count. Some historians believe the real number could be as high as 200,000 in one night. Now here's the part they don't tell you in history class. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. Over the next 5 months, the U.S. launched similar attacks on 66 more Japanese cities. By the time Japan surrendered in August, American firebombing had killed an estimated 500,000 Japanese civilians. That's more than the atomic bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. But when we talk about World War II, we talk about the atomic bombs. We don't talk about this. Why? Because the atomic bombs were new, shocking. They fit the narrative of ending the war. But the firebombing? That's harder to talk about. It forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. Questions like, is it okay to kill civilians to save soldiers? Is it okay to use terror as a weapon? Where's the line between war and war crime? Curtis LeMay, the man who planned the Tokyo raid, never apologized. In fact, he was promoted. He became a general. He helped create the U.S. Air Force as we know it today. Later in life, someone asked him if he felt guilty about the firebombing. He said, "I suppose if I had lost the war, I would have been tried as a war criminal. Fortunately, we were on the winning side." Think about that. He admitted that what he did would have been considered a war crime if Japan had won. But because America won, it's just called strategy. History is written by the victors, and the victors get to decide what's called heroism and what's called murder. Here's something else they didn't teach you. The U.S. government suppressed photographs of the Tokyo bombing for decades. They didn't want the American public to see what fire does to human bodies. They didn't want people to see children burned beyond recognition. They didn't want anyone asking, was this really necessary? Even today, these images are hard to find. They're not in textbooks, they're not in documentaries, because they're too horrifying. They showed the reality of what happens when you drop fire on a city made of wood. In Japan, the firebombing is remembered differently. Every year on March 10th, there are memorial ceremonies. Survivors share their stories. Children learn about the night the sky turned red. But even in Japan, it's complicated, because Japan was not innocent in World War II. Japanese forces committed atrocities across Asia, the rape of Nanking, the Bataan Death March. Unit 731's biological experiments. Millions of Chinese, Korean, Filipino, and other Asian civilians were tortured, enslaved, and killed by the Japanese military. So when we talk about the firebombing of Tokyo, we have to hold two truths at once. Japan committed terrible war crimes. Burning 100,000 civilians alive was still wrong. Both things can be true. War doesn't have good guys and bad guys. It has people making impossible choices in impossible circumstances. And civilians always pay the price. Here's what you need to understand. The firebombing of Tokyo didn't have to happen. By March 45, Japan was already losing the war. Their navy was destroyed. Their air force was gone. They were blockaded and starving. The atomic bombs were only months away. Many historians argue that Japan would have surrendered anyway. So why the firebombing? Some say it was to test tactics, to see if fire could break a nation's will. Others say it was revenge for Pearl Harbor. Still others say it was momentum. The war machine was rolling and no one wanted to stop it. But the truth that makes people uncomfortable is, Curtis LeMay believed that killing civilians faster would end the war faster. And by the logic of war, he was right. Japan did surrender. American troops didn't have to invade. Fewer American soldiers died. But 500,000 Japanese civilians burned. So the question is, was it worth it? There's no easy answer, and that's exactly why this story matters. Let me tell you about the survivors. The people who lived through that night carried the scars forever. Not just physical scars, though many were horribly burned. Psychological scars. Survivor's guilt, trauma, nightmares. One survivor, a woman named Haruyo Nihei, was 8 years old that night. She watched her mother burn to death while trying to shield her younger brother. She survived by hiding under a bridge while the fire raged. For the rest of her life, she couldn't stand the smell of cooked meat. Another survivor, a man named Katsumoto Saotore, dedicated his entire life to documenting the firebombing. He interviewed thousands of survivors, collected their stories, built a museum. Why? Because he said, if we don't remember, it will happen again. And he's right, because the tactics used in Tokyo were used again in Korea, in Vietnam, in Iraq. Bombing cities, burning civilians, calling it collateral damage. The names change, the technology improves, but the strategy remains the same. Here's something people never talk about. What happened to the men who dropped the bombs? Many of them struggled with what they'd done. They'd been told they were hitting factories and military targets. But when they flew back over Tokyo, they saw the truth. Miles and miles of residential neighborhoods gone. Some pilots broke down, some turned to alcohol, some never spoke about the war again. One pilot later said, "We were just following orders, but at what point does following orders become murder?" That question haunted him until the day he died. Why does this story matter today? Because we're having the same debates. Drone strikes that kill civilians, smart bombs that aren't so smart, wars fought from the sky where the people dropping the bombs never see the faces of the dead. Every generation thinks they found a cleaner way to wage war, a more precise way, a more surgical way. But war is never clean, and civilians still die. The firebombing of Tokyo reminds us that the distance between strategy and atrocity is thinner than we like to admit. It reminds us that good people can do terrible things when they believe the cause is just. It reminds us to question authority, to question orders, to question whether the ends really justify the means. Here's how to put this in perspective. The 9/11 attacks killed approximately 3,000 people. The atomic bomb on Hiroshima killed approximately 80,000 people. The firebombing of Tokyo killed 100,000 people in 6 hours. And yet, most Americans have never heard of it. It's not taught in schools, it's not in movies, it's not part of the national conversation about World War II. Why? Because it complicates the narrative. We like our history simple, good versus evil, heroes versus villains. But the firebombing of Tokyo shows us that real history is messy. The heroes did terrible things, the victims weren't always innocent, and the line between justice and revenge is often invisible. Here's the hardest part to accept. Everyone involved thought they were doing the right thing. Curtis LeMay thought he was saving American lives. The pilots thought they were serving their country. The American public thought they were defeating evil. And they weren't entirely wrong. Imperial Japan was brutal. Their military committed imaginable atrocities. The war needed to end. But does that justify burning 100,000 civilians alive? Does it justify orphaning children, widowing spouses, destroying homes? There's no easy answer, and anyone who tells you there is hasn't really thought about it. Here are the facts your history teacher never mentioned. Fact 1. The firebombing of Tokyo killed more people in 6 hours than the Black Death killed in London in 6 months. Fact 2. The fire was so hot that glass melted, metal twisted, stone crumbled. Fact 3. The smoke from the fire reached 30,000 feet in the air, higher than most planes could fly. Fact 4. Some people survived by burying themselves in piles of corpses. The bodies insulated them from the heat. Fact 5. The canals were so full of bodies that they had to be dredged for weeks afterwards. Fact 6. Many victims weren't burned, they suffocated. The fire consumed all the oxygen in the air. Fact 7. Children made up nearly 40% of the casualties. They couldn't run fast enough. Fact 8. The firebombing campaign against Japan killed more civilians than both atomic bombs combined. Fact 9. Curtis LeMay received a medal for the Tokyo raid. He was called a hero. Fact 10. The full extent of the damage was classified by the U.S. government until the 1970s. Let me show you something that will change how you see World War II. The Holocaust killed approximately 6 million Jews over several years. It's remembered as the greatest atrocity in human history, and it should be. But the Allied firebombing campaign killed 500,000 Japanese civilians in 5 months, and we barely talk about it. Both were systematic. Both targeted civilians. Both were morally indefensible. The difference? One was done by the losers. One was done by the winners. History remembers them very differently. I'm not comparing the two to minimize the Holocaust. I'm comparing them to show how selective our memory is. We remember the atrocities committed by our enemies. We forget the ones committed in our name. The M69 incendiary bomb was designed by chemists at Harvard University. Yes, Harvard. American scientists created a gel that would stick to human skin and burn at temperatures hot enough to melt bone. They tested it on mock Japanese villages built in the Utah desert. They measured wind patterns, calculated optimal drop altitudes, perfected the formula. This wasn't an accident of war. This was science weaponized for mass murder. And after the war, many of those scientists went on to prestigious careers. They published papers, won awards, became professors. Nobody asked them, "How do you sleep at night?" As of 2024, only a handful of Tokyo firebombing survivors are still alive. They're in their 80s and 90s now, and they're desperately trying to tell their stories before it's too late. Because they know what happens when there are no more witnesses. The story becomes abstract, numbers on a page, a paragraph in a history book. It stops being real. And when it stops being real, it becomes possible again. That's why these survivors spend their final years visiting schools, giving interviews, writing memoirs. They're trying to make sure we never forget, because they remember what forgetting costs. Here's what I want you to take away from this. The firebombing of Tokyo wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't collateral damage. It was a deliberate strategy to terrorize civilians into submission. And it worked. Japan surrendered. The war ended. American troops came home. But at what cost? 100,000 lives. 500,000 across all of Japan. Mostly women, mostly children, mostly people who never held a weapon. Were they guilty because they were Japanese, because their government started the war? Or were they victims of forces beyond their control? The truth is complicated. War is never clean. Victory is never pure. Heroes are never perfect. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't tell the story. It means we should tell it honestly, with all the horror, all the complexity, all the moral weight. Because the moment we sanitize war, we make it easier to wage the next one. I want you to imagine something. What if it was your city? What if it was your home? What if it was your family running through streets of fire? Would you care if your government was at war? Would you think you deserved it? Or would you just want to protect your children? That's the perspective we lose when we talk about war in the abstract, when we talk about casualties instead of people, when we talk about strategy instead of suffering. The 100,000 people who died in Tokyo that night weren't statistics. They were human beings. Each one had a name, a family, a story. Each one felt fear, felt pain, felt the heat on their skin as the world burned around them. They died because powerful men in distant rooms made decisions they had no control over, just like civilians in every war, just like civilians in the next war. This isn't ancient history. This happened within living memory. Some survivors are still alive today, and the tactics used that night are still being debated. When is it okay to bomb cities? When is it okay to accept civilian casualties? Who decides what's proportional? These questions matter because we're still dropping bombs, we're still killing civilians, we're still calling it necessary. The technology has changed, the justifications have changed, but the outcome is the same. People burn, people die, people suffer. And the people who ordered it sleep soundly believing they did what had to be done. Let me tell you something that will make you uncomfortable. After the war, Curtis LeMay studied what worked in Tokyo. He refined the tactics, improved the strategy, and then he taught those tactics to the next generation of military planners. Those tactics were used in Korea, in Vietnam, in Cambodia, in Iraq. The Dresden firebombing in Germany killed 25,000 people using the same approach. Napalm became a standard weapon, used for decades. The logic was always the same. It saves our soldiers' lives. It shortens the war. But the cost was always paid by civilians, by people who couldn't fight back, who couldn't surrender, who couldn't escape. This is the legacy of Tokyo. Not just the 100,000 dead, but the precedent it set. The idea that terror is an acceptable tactic, that the ends justify the means, that victory excuses atrocity. Here's something most people don't know. After the war, some Japanese survivors met with American veterans who had flown the bombing missions. They sat together, talked, shared their stories, and something remarkable happened. They forgave each other. The survivors realized the pilots were just young men following orders, scared, trying to survive. The pilots realized the people below weren't monsters. They were families, children, innocents. Both sides recognized they were pawns in a game played by people far above them. It doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't make it okay. But it shows that healing is possible. That even the worst atrocities don't have to define us forever. That humanity can survive even when humans do inhuman things. The firebombing of Tokyo is a story about the cost of war. Not the cost measured in dollars or territory. The cost measured in human lives, human suffering, human dignity. It's a story about ordinary people caught in extraordinary horror. It's a story about the distance between right and wrong becoming impossible to measure. It's a story about how good people can do terrible things when they stop seeing the humanity in others. Most importantly, it's a story that forces us to ask, what would I have done? Would I have followed orders? Would I have questioned authority? Would I have dropped those bombs? Would I have run through those streets? We like to think we'd be heroes, that we'd do the right thing, but the truth is, most of us would just try to survive. Just like the pilots, just like the civilians, just like everyone in every war. On March 10, 1945, the sky over Tokyo turned red. 100,000 people died in 6 hours. Their names are mostly forgotten, their stories mostly untold, but they deserve to be remembered, not as casualties, not as statistics, as people, as mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, as human beings who woke up that morning not knowing they would be dead by sunrise. This is the story they never taught you in school. This is the truth that complicates the narrative. This is the firebombing of Tokyo. Remember it, because the moment we forget is the moment it becomes possible again.